Hello and welcome to another podcast edition of Taiwan Talk. I'm Keith Manconi. Today we're going to be revisiting an organization that we actually spoke with 2 years ago, right as it was just getting started, actually. That was Teach for Taiwan, which is a group working to address education inequality here in Taiwan. And the way that they're doing it is by recruiting young people who they then train to become teachers, and then they send them out to rural areas. And as we're going to hear in a second, those rural areas can have a very hard time finding teachers. The group's founder and chairperson, An-Ting Liu, has a big vision for where she wants this all to go. And I thought now was a pretty good time to check in on how that's all going. First of all, those teaching fellowships, as they're called, they last 2 years. So the first batch of teachers that were sent out are now just coming up on the end of their term, a couple months from now. On top of that, An-Ting was recently recognized on the Forbes magazine list of 30 under 30 social entrepreneurs in Asia. So, must be doing something right. I recently met up with An-Ting at the Teach for Taiwan office in Taipei to hear what the last 2 years have been like.
An-Ting Liu, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Keith.
So a lot of our listeners will probably be familiar with your work and your program, especially since we've had you on the show before. But just to kind of lay it out again, remind people about the issues that you're working on. Sure. It seems like the basic problem, if we're really just going to put it in its most basic form, is just the fact that there aren't enough teachers that are willing to work in rural areas. So that's why it's so hard to find adequate teachers to serve these schools and serve these students. So can you talk a little bit about what is the source of this problem?
Sure. There's actually a lack of quantity and quality of teachers in these underperforming, underprivileged schools in Taiwan. So it's not simply a number issue, but also how to enable teachers who go to these schools to perform well. So our approach, we are halfway into our third year. So in the past 2 years, we have sent out 2 cohorts of fellows into our 2-year program. In this 2-year program, you can sort of see it as an alternative master's program, where in these 2 years, we enable willing and capable teachers to gain the competencies they need and the team that will support them to work in these areas, to really work with and serve those students, especially with an underprivileged background. And we are now, I said, in our third year. So the first 2 cohorts combined together had about 30 fellows selected out of a pool of about 500 applicants. And we are actually in the process of recruiting for our third year fellows. We can talk about that later. But we're expecting 30 additional fellows to join us this year.
And so that's, very impressive. Just 2 years in, you already have 30 teachers that are out there. But getting back to the root problem here, I mean, is it just a matter of a lot of these qualified teachers just would prefer to remain in the city and they don't want to go into a more rural area?
Yes, that's one part of the issue where a lot of the teachers, certified teachers, would prefer to stay in urban areas. But as I said, it's not entirely their choice either, because even if they do go to these areas, they are ill supported. They have a significant lack of resources they do need to perform well. So when we look at the 2-year program and invest in their influence impact after the 2 years, we want to build a system that not only would enable these fellows and teachers to bridge them to go there, but also to provide the supporting system and resources on the ground so that they can continue their impact even beyond the 2-year program.
So, I mean, that's, just to put it briefly, I mean, that's really the focus of your work, is finding qualified teachers, finding passionate folks that are willing to go out and serve these communities, and then giving them the resources so that they can do a good job.
That's right, but the way we do this is not only through bridging people to go to these places, but also from working closely with local communities to understand what they need and how we can best work with them. So what we offer each community is not exactly the same. We want to make sure that we are not coming in sort of in the savior context. We come in a collaborative approach that enables us, the community, and also outside stakeholders to work in a aligned manner.
And okay, so you're 2 years in now. You're working in 4 different regions around Taiwan. As we mentioned, you have 30 teachers that are out there. Can you just kind of give us a bird's eye view of what this all looks like right now? I mean, tell us about where they are in Taiwan and what kind of work they're doing, just so we can kind of picture what's going on in these classrooms.
Sure. The 4 regions are Tainan, Pingtung, Yunlin, and Taidong. So if you know Taiwan's geography, it's mostly in the south part of the island, southeast and southwest. If you want to get a sort of bird's eye view of what's happening on the ground, as I said, there's a lot of differences in different communities, but overall, the children, the students that we work with usually come from really fragile families. So what the teachers would have to do is not simply asking for their academic performances, but to also step further to their communities and families to really bring the parents into the learning process of the students, to enable the students to see connections between what they're learning and their lives and their cultural contexts, and to really build that sense of importance and motivation for the students in the learning environment, not simply to in a more traditional way to pass the tests or to go into a good school. We want to instill in those communities an environment that facilitates learning and enables the students to achieve for their own goals, not simply academically. So in general, that's what we are doing in these communities. And there are so many amazing stories that are happening on the ground. There are parents. A lot of the parents that we work with, especially in the southwest part of the island, are from Southeast Asia. There's a huge wave of immigrants coming from Southeast Asia in these parts of Taiwan, and typically they feel quite marginalized in the communities and in the schools. But the teachers, they bring in these parents and families. They had, for example, there are some parents who, because of the encouragement of our fellows and teachers, they opened their own restaurants or found their own place and significance in the community as artists, and they are so actively participating in their children's learning in the schools, and the children had won awards or participated in different musical or sportive events, and proved that really the only thing that were preventing them from succeeding in their career as a student were environmental ones, not sort of ones they're born with, and they are able to achieve more with the proper instructions and the environment that enables them to do so. So it may sound vague, but really I wish I could bring you to one of these schools, Keith, to really see what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, that does sound like a lot of exciting stuff. Again, to maybe help our listeners, because you know, I think for a lot of us living in Taiwan, it's very hard for us to even think of an education problem. I mean, in the big cities, all we see is kids in, 8-9 hours a day. It's like a job. They study so much. And so I think for a lot of our listeners, we may not be terribly familiar with what the situation is like in some of these more rural communities. Sure. So going back a second and just saying, lacking some of these services, what is the situation like? Why is this something that caught your attention and made you realize, there's a problem here, and extra services need to be provided?
Right. If you look at sort of broader data, a lot of us see Taiwan in general as in terms of education be performing well, and having a lot of great results in terms of international competitions or even PISA test results. But if you look deeper into these data, you see that the bipolarization of our student performances it's a very severe issue here. If you look at PISA results, for example, the distance between the highest and the lowest performing students in Taiwan is in fact the largest in the world in terms of OECD data. And the bipolarization is not random either. It's highly associated with the student's socioeconomic background. And so, in other words, lower performing students are performing very ill, and they are usually from low socioeconomic statuses in Taiwan. One of the reasons that's causing this is teachers' quality and quantity lacking in these areas. But if you look even deeper into that lacking, why is it that even when a teacher is willing and hardworking in their work in these schools, why is it so hard for them to bring up students' academic performances? One of the reasons is because the material that the students are asked to be learning, you mentioned before that they spend so much time in the schools. Why is it that they're not learning? The materials are usually quite disconnected from the students' living contexts, so they do not see the reason why they should learn these materials. They lack motivation. In addition, their parents are usually from lower education backgrounds, so they do not see a role model around them where education has really made a difference in their community. So they do not understand the sense of urgency importance in spending time in school. So even though they spend so much time in school, quite frankly, even the teachers would say so, a lot of the time was not used efficiently. And a lot of the students, as soon as they get a chance, they want to run away from the pressure and the judgment coming from this really frustrating learning system we have built for them. So that's why I was saying when we send teachers in there, we're not just sending a person there and asking them to follow the system that had been in place there. When we send a person or two people there, any number of people we send there, we ask them to look at the issue from a more holistic perspective, where you see different stakeholders in there. I mentioned materials, I mentioned community, I mentioned environment, I mentioned role models. All these things need to really come together and to allow our students in these areas to break through from their replication of their parents' social statuses. They need extra support and they need extra motivation, and that's what we ask these individuals to do on the ground.
Well, digging into that even just a little bit deeper, I mean, you talk about a resource gap between the major cities and the rural areas. Could you talk a little bit, is there also an achievement gap? I mean, when we look at what life is like for these students after they graduate, is it really more difficult for them to find work that they would want to have? What can we look to, or what do you look to get a sense of that?
Right. It's a complicated issue, and if I twist your question a little bit to ask, how do we define success in the teacher's work? We don't just look at academic performances, which is important, but not the only important thing. So in addition to academic performance, we look at students' learning motivation and also their sense of efficacy. And these three things, we think, are crucial to enabling the student to achieve his or her goal in life. Traditionally, we define success in quite a narrow way. In the Taiwanese society, you have to get into National Taiwan University, or you have to be a lawyer, engineer, or a doctor. We don't necessarily want to to force that sense of defined path for our students. We do want them to succeed, but not only in the narrow definition of success. We want to succeed in terms of their own goals and finding their own full potential in life. And so, yes, to answer your question, look at data, anything. If you define success in a narrow way, then yes, overwhelmingly, there are, I think, 80% or more students in National Taiwan University coming from Taipei City alone. So you see that the resource gap, the achievement gap is huge, is very obvious as well. But when we try to change that, we don't just want to try to encourage all of them to go to NTU. We want to make sure that when we help them succeed, it's succeeding in realizing their full potential, but not forcing them to become successful only from the society's point of view.
Now, looking back on the 2 years that you've done, I mean, in this conversation that you've had so far, you've kind of gone back to emphasizing how much you really do want to work with these communities, and you've even stressed the importance of, if these kids are going to succeed, it's going to be because they're going to see the value of these studies in the context of their own communities. And I remember when I interviewed you 2 years ago, that was something that you, I guess I can use the word worried. You were a little worried about that you really would be able to integrate the teachers that you were sending out there into these communities and not produce a lot of strife, a lot of unnecessary strife. So reflect on that a little bit. I mean, now that you have 2 years of experience, how's that been going? Have you been able to make this as smooth a process as you were hoping?
Yes, actually, I've been so grateful for those communities, whether it's their local leaders, their members, or just the teachers who we've sent into these communities. We've trained them to build trustful relationship. We train them to really see the root issues in these communities, not trying to impose on them what they thought before they joined the community. So all these things have really come together in the past 2 years. We have seen local leaders championing for more of our Teach for Taiwan fellows to join their community because they have seen real values that they are providing. In a joking way, but it's actually real. Some of our fellows had actually been asked to join local elections. They had not said yes. It's against their contract in the 2 years, but that's simply to say that the trust they've been able to build the communities was even enough for them to be considered an elected leader in some of these towns or smaller tribes. And one of the reasons is because these communities that we work with typically have an issue of young people moving out continuously and in a big scale as well. But now we are actually encouraging and sending capable and willing young people to really invest and build roots in these communities. The members in those communities are truly appreciative of these young people, and so to answer your question, yes, I think, I don't know if I would use the word worry either, but yes, it was something that we saw as a big challenge we needed to overcome. And in the past 2 years, thanks to our friends and partners locally, I think that's been one of the areas of great progress and success for us, actually. Mm-hmm.
Now, I think a lot of our listeners will be familiar with Teach for America, and your program, Teach for Taiwan, is kind of modeled on that in a lot of ways, although it also has a lot of things that are distinctive about it. Right. And Teach for America, it takes some criticism sometimes, because, well, I mean, if you look at it a certain way, it can come off a little condescending. We're these educated elite people. We're going to go and fix your community. We're going to go out and fix you. Is that something that you were trying to work to get past, or was that an attitude that you ran into, and how did you get past that?
Sure. Yes, the program borrows its name from Teach for America, and it is in many ways inspired by some of his work, but I would say it's actually by now more different than it is similar to the Teach for America model, partly because we started with a very small scale. The reason behind that is to ensure that we gain sufficient understanding, because you can only gain this understanding by working with them, not by studying them or by reading on data. You really need to get on the ground and start working with them little by little to be able to gain trust and to be able to design the program really from the community's perspective. And so we started with only 9 fellows the first year. With such a small number, it enables us, myself, I spend more than half my time on the ground talking to leaders and trying to really, even from a scientific point of view, collect evidences on our success and failure on the ground, and we, with that data, quickly corrected a lot of our program design. In second year, we sent more fellows, 20 fellows, and this year we're expecting even more, 30. And I mentioned before that the relationships that we have built with local communities is actually something that I am extremely grateful and proud of, because that if I could only mention one thing that contributes to our success so far, it would be that really we have a strong foundation of trust and working relations with these communities that we do work with. Before we send any fellow into a community, we spend at least half a year to a year to converse with the members of the community to make sure they're comfortable. And only when they're comfortable, we sign a contract of cooperation with them. And so I think the mindset that we had instilled in our work from the very onset of our work contributes to this quite different relationship. And I cannot comment on Teach for America since I think with such a big program, there's so much diversity in there as well. I'm sure in some communities they face challenges that you mentioned, being seen as condescending, but in some others they may have success as well. So I can't comment on them, but for our perspective, I think we see ourselves actually as a grassroots movement. So to be able to call ourselves a grassroots movement, we really need to be part of the grassroots. And so that's why I'm confident if you actually go to any of these communities and ask them about Teach for Taiwan Fellows, you will hear very positive feedback from them.
Right, so up until now, we've really been focusing on the school end of things. But of course, the other end that you really need to be thinking a lot about is the teachers, the folks that you're going to be sending out there. And so that's a whole process. You need to recruit them, you need to train them, you need to support them. Have you run into anything in that whole process that's surprised you? I mean, volunteerism is, the attitudes towards it in Taiwan are perhaps a little bit different in the U.S. So I'm just curious, I mean, what was that experience like?
Sure. As you said, the idea of volunteerism is quite different in Taiwan than, say, the Western countries. So to convince the younger people took some work, but actually we found that one surprising aspect of it was actually more difficult to convince their parents than the young people per se. So we actually did a lot of work to involve the parents of these potential fellows in the early stage.
And we're talking about adults here. Right. They were on board with this, but their parents were skeptical.
That's right. They worried, right? Sending their kids to faraway places, doing work that seems to be so difficult. They're worried that they would be harmed, or they would lose money, or anything. They can worry about a lot of things, and we understand. So once we found that out, as I said, we have info sessions. We have line groups. We have Facebook pages specifically for the parents of our fellows to really convince them that we are a trustworthy team and that your children are succeeding and excelling during their 2 years here and beyond.
So it's really a matter of kind of winning hearts and minds to a certain extent. I mean, does it also involve an attitude change or a culture change to any extent?
Of course, I think there's some aspect of that as well to challenge the traditional definition of success, to call for a broader imagination of what your child could do in the future, not just sort of traditional professions that most parents can imagine for their kids. And so, yes, there are some extent of reimagining things there. But yes, we do focus on relationship building before we make any challenges to their beliefs.
Now, you've been kind of hinting at this the whole time, and now I really just want to hit it really squarely. I mean, looking forward, it sounds like a lot of what you're talking about here is not just a matter of resources, and you've said that. It's really a matter of changing the approach to education on a pretty fundamental level. I mean, you're talking about not just teaching towards tests. You're talking about not just focusing on a specific set of goals, maybe having a more broader idea of what success could mean. So talk a little bit about that aspect of what you're doing and what you're hoping this to kind of move towards in the long term.
Sure. Well, in the long term, as you said, I think there is a broad wave of education changes being called for by a lot of different people, many more prominent than us, but we do see ourselves as only one player in this greater education reform movement that's happening in Taiwan, and so Some of the listeners, you might have heard of Dr. Benson Ye from National Taiwan University. You might have heard of Stanley Yan of Cultural Alliance Foundation. You might have heard of Khan Academy, or the Taiwanese version being called Junyi Academy. There are so many of our partners and collaborators. Together, we are able to move things forward day by day. And areas that need reform include teachers supporting system, teacher training. We include resource reallocation, would include a higher level imagination for the future of our education. It would include enabling the teaching profession to be attracting the right talents again. So there are so many things that needs to happen, and us in Teach for Taiwan, we focus more, as you've heard, on the teacher side, and especially teachers for the rural or underprivileged schools in Taiwan.
All right, and just looking at this very specific moment in time, your group is working towards starting their third year of teaching, which I'm sure is very exciting, but you've also got some recruitment going on that's just about to wrap up.
That's right. So if any of you are interested, our current recruiting deadline is April 7th at 1 p.m. So we do have a long weekend coming up. So if you're interested, make sure you submit your application online.
And the website is?
It's www.teachfortaiwan, that's number 4, so TEACH, the number 4, TAIWAN.org.
All right, so you have the long weekend to work on that, as she said. We have been speaking today to An Ting Lu. She is the chairperson of Teach for Taiwan. An Ting, thanks so much for speaking with us today.
No, thank you for taking the time, Keith.
That's it for the show today. Taiwan Talk is ICRT's weekly interview segment, bringing you conversations from and about Taiwan. You can catch the broadcast every Monday at 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. right after the top-of-the-hour news broadcast. Or you can find extended interviews online, just like the one you just heard. Those are available on iTunes, the ICRT website, and I am trying to start making blog posts about it at the ICRT blog as well. Tight week schedule, but doing my best there. If you are listening through iTunes, please do subscribe to the show, leave a comment, rate and review it. All of those things really do help us get the word out about it. Also lets us know what you're thinking, so that is very helpful as well, and we do thank you for that. Thank you for listening to the show today for Taiwan Talk and ICRT. I'm Keith Manconi.